Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Santa baby, a 54 convertible to light blue.
Welcome back to The Law Show. Just a few more sleeps before Santa Baby hopefully slides by our neighborhood. It's Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojcevic with me in studio today from Maynard Kisher Stojcevic, immigration and citizenship lawyers. Our final show with these two gentlemen of the season. So a great opportunity, guys. We've been together all year to take a look back at 2015 from an immigration and citizenship perspective. This is minus the political changes that we're going to talk about. What were the big cases of 2015 in your bailiwick, in your area of the law?
In terms of court cases, there are several that come to mind, and groups of cases also. First, the long-held belief that challenging labor market impact assessments was not a very useful tool to use judicial review in federal court. That actually was broken this year by several successful challenges, judicial reviews, that have brought some semblance of judicial oversight and scrutiny to officers in labor market impact assessment contexts, and has been enormously useful.
Were they given too much latitude, Alex? Were they given too much discretion, and thus there was a need for someone to maybe rein them in every now and then?
So, in administrative law generally, since a case called Dunsmuir some years ago, there's been an evolution, an aggressive evolution towards deference.
Okay.
So any time that you have a specialized tribunal now, the courts increasingly are less and less willing to interfere in that tribunal's decisions. To the point now where so many things are on a reasonableness standard, and reasonableness has been interpreted as if we're giving deference and the decision is at all reasonable, even if the reviewing court doesn't agree with it, it stands.
Sure.
And the challenge with that is illustrated in another case that came out this year that is enormously frustrating to both us, the Immigration and Refugee Board, and to the government to some extent. One of the big challenges that has gone forward since 2013 is the government of the day changed what a permanent resident can get automatically deported for. They changed the rules so that a 2-year sentence, which used to be what the rule was, if you got a 2-year sentence, you were automatically deported from Canada if it was a 2-year judicial sentence. You had no right to an appeal to the Immigration and Refugee Board's appeal division on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. That was eliminated at a 2-year threshold. Well, in 2013, they changed that to 6 months. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Now, when that happened, this created a problem because the Criminal Code of Canada allows for something called conditional sentence orders.
Yes.
Conditional sentence orders are sentence orders it can be interpreted as both being custodial sentences served in the community.
Right.
But really, in reality, you're not actually locked up during that sentence. So
sometimes you wear a bracelet, but you're at home, and it's not a slammer.
Is it a term of imprisonment, or isn't it?
Right.
Well, Canada Border Services pretty quickly after 2013, and even before that, took the position that these were custodial sentences.
Okay.
And defense lawyers took the position, well, no, they're not, because you're not actually locked up.
Right.
This has gone all the way to the Federal Court of Appeal, and the Federal Court of Appeal has come down with an enormously unsatisfactory answer, and one that is unsatisfactory to everybody. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because they took the position that, well, the Immigration and Refugee Board's decision on this point, in this particular case, was reasonable, and we'll give it deference, and we're not going to say if a custodial sentence is actually includes a conditional sentence order. What we're going to do is we're going to say that the decision of the board on this point is reasonable, and they're the ones who should make that determination, opening the door for a different case, somebody to argue slightly differently, and then determine that the decision that the last time the appeal division of the Immigration and Refugee Board ruled is potentially wrong. meaning that we'll have to litigate all of this all over again if there's any contradiction between the immigration and
just a
refugee.
step.
And Rudy, you're rolling your eyes like you really want to have a go at this if I absolutely have to.
I think it's important for the listeners to understand how serious this is, because what it means is when a judge looks to sentence somebody and they decide that they're not a danger to the community,
right,
they're not deserving of the most harshest sort of terms that we can have in our society. We don't torture people anymore. We don't whip them. We lock them away.
Right.
So the most serious stuff we say for locking people away. Now, if we give somebody a conditional sentence order, it means that they don't, number one, they're not that dangerous, right? They're going to be allowed to go home. They may be even allowed to go to work and have to return every evening, etc., right?
Yep.
So that, we're saying that they're probably not that dangerous, that they're probably going to reform, and they're not deserving of the full extent of the law that we can do today, and for a short period of time. So what the Immigration Department has gone and done by passing this law is saying when somebody gets that mild a sentence, they get deported without even having a chance for an appeal.
No appeal
No
process.
appeal. So a person, we have clients that come into our office that have lived here for 20, 30 years, right? Came here as children, right? Get mixed up in the wrong crowd at 21 or something. They throw a beer bottle at a party. All of a sudden, that's assault causing bodily harm with a weapon because it's a beer bottle.
Right.
So, not a nice thing to happen. The person's definitely guilty. Gets a mild sentence, like 6 months. You're going to have to stay at home. All of a sudden, that man is ripped out of his family here, whether he has children, whether he has a wife, and sent home with no opportunity for his story to be heard.
When did this appeal provision get removed,
2013.
Alex? Okay. Do you expect I know we're jumping ahead to the next segment here. Do you expect the new regime to change that?
It's very unlikely. I don't expect to at all. I think this will instead still be litigated. Let me give you an example of how crazy this provision is in practice. I have to regularly tell clients to avoid this conditional sentence order to go and take a 5-month jail sentence or a 4-month jail sentence to preserve their appeal right. Okay, with all the hardship that imposes, with all this head scratching that the provincial court or the Supreme Court judge will look at when they hear that they're better off.
You actually want to go to jail, sir?
There's a better off being in jail for less than 6 months than it is to have a conditional sentence order because their status could be at risk.
Or even worse.
And that's an absurdity.
Yeah. Another absurdity is to get a variety of, instead of, you get the sentences, so instead of, getting a 10-month sentence, we ask that we get sentenced on 2 different counts for 5 months each.
Right.
So it happens the same, but it's under the 6 months, right? So you're going back and looking at all these sort of creative ways, because I think this is what immigration intended. I don't think Canadians as a whole, when they look at the cases that people are, the hardship that they're facing, are in favor of this.
Another case that, however, did bring some certainty to an otherwise problematic part of the law involved a decision just last week at the Supreme Court of Canada. It's a decision under initials because everybody involved was a refugee claimant, and that's amongst the Sun Sea. If your listeners remember, Ocean Lady and Sun Sea are 2 ships that came full of Sri Lankan refugee claimants.
That's right, a couple of years ago. That's right.
So the government took the position that the organizers or some of the crew leaders on that ship were in fact people smugglers, even though they themselves made refugee claimants, were also from were of Tamil origin, etc. And one of the key questions that the Supreme Court of Canada was asked to resolve was, do the people smuggling provisions under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act also cover situations where people themselves are refugee claimants, and if they're just assisting what are otherwise legitimate refugee claimants that are, say, family members or someone like that? Because the challenge we've seen in is that there have been people who have been prosecuted in Canada for assisting a family member escape from another country and come illegally into Canada. And the argument many lawyers have taken is, people smuggling is where you're paid to move people around.
That's right, human trafficking.
Human trafficking.
Right.
Surely there has to be a distinction between, helping a family member in need for no financial gain and who we've recognized later as a refugee,
right,
and people in this situation. Well, the court has agreed. And the court came down with a quite comprehensive decision that makes it pretty clear that people smuggling does not include these types of situations.
This is quite recent, too,
This
isn't
is a
it, Alex?
decision just from last week.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's an interesting case because what happened in that case is that the people that were charged weren't actually people that had collected money or anything, right? They were aboard the ship anyway, coming towards Canada, and the ship ran into trouble, and the guys that had taken the money, they kept abandoned ship and left them on this
That's right.
rudderless ship,
Right.
and they therefore had some seagoing experience, organized the ship, and figured out where they were and kept sailing towards Canada. And so, you know, the thought was, well, if I'm sitting here trying to help people survive on a boat and we end up in Canada, I'm now being excluded from making a refugee claim, right? And the court
And
took
the real
exemption.
human traffickers had already bailed
Yeah,
out.
they'd already bailed and gone.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interesting big cases from 2015.
Well, and let's not forget the biggest one, or at least the biggest one for the election, is the niqab case, right?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
so the woman who wanted to had been here as a permanent resident, had applied for permanent residency, achieved permanent residency. Written the English test.
That's right.
Written, had passed the citizenship questionnaire, had shown her identity, and then wanted at the swearing-in ceremony to wear her niqab, right, and cover her face. And the government took exemption, said no, and it's a public swearing-in ceremony, and you have to remove that veil, and you wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Right.
She took that to federal court, and the federal court sided with her and said, it's freedom of religion. There's no question of identity. We know who she is, and we believe that freedom of religion should be. And what the court said was, again, as Alex had mentioned earlier, it was about the procedure and the way it was done. So what the court held is you can change these rules, but you actually have to, pass some laws that talk
Right.
about it.
Right.
Because in the laws you have right now, you said religious freedom should be respected as much as possible at the swearing, as much accommodation as possible should be given. And what happened is the minister just passed down a memo going around saying, well, this is our new policy as opposed to changing the law. So it was a procedural fairness almost.
It was a
again in
procedural
terms of,
fairness,
and that's
sure.
why. So
And the court didn't say you could not ban the niqab necessarily.
Right. But you can't do it through a
just said-
ministerial policy switch.
You can't do it through a ministerial policy change, especially when the law is quite explicit that you're supposed to accommodate religious freedom.
Right.
And what the court struggled with was that the woman's identity had been checked independently at a previous
Yes.
when she wrote the test.
And her
She
face
did-
had been verified.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right.
when
So-
she arrived at the ceremony.
By the proper officials.
by the proper officials.
Right.
So there didn't seem to be much sense to or logical connection between the ministerial memo and what actually goes on in
And we
practice.
remember this coming down because, of course, it all happened during the election campaign, and the Harper government got their back up and, we're going to appeal this. This is crazy. And then so they lose. And so the Trudeau government comes in, and one of the first announcements they make is, we're not going to proceed with the appeal on the niqab case.
they withdrew the appeal.
We're
They
okay with
withdrew
that
the appeal.
decision.
Yeah.
And that represents, I think, Rudy, it's a bit of a hint as to the sorts of changes one might anticipate in 2016 under this newly elected government. Do you think they're going to do things dramatically differently or slightly differently?
I think we're looking at a dramatic difference because they ran on a very different platform than the Conservatives have run the Immigration Department on, right? So if you take a look at the issues that came up, number one, refugees came up, something we've never seen before, very often in terms of it being an election issue. And it became a large election issue, and they've made it an aggressive policy that we're going to take sort of 25,000 people in a very short order.
Yeah.
So I think that is a very different approach than we've seen from the Harper government. So that's going to be different. They talked a lot, and what they ran on sort of the importance of family during immigration, and that's where they were trying to get those, if we want to say those more left-leaning votes in terms of making that a priority over economics.
Right.
And they're going to have to respond to that by shortening processing time. So I think we're going to see some large changes that one. I think what might get ignored is the business and the economic immigrants.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and thank you for opening that door ever so gracefully. We're going to talk about the changes that the new government they've certainly run on, indicated they're in favor of, what they're likely to be able to accomplish given the bureaucracy every government has to work with, and of course the big story in immigration and citizenship file in Canada in 2015 is the international refugee crisis, 25,000 of whom are going to end up in our country sometime during 2016. And we'll talk more about that with Rudy Kisher and Alex Stoychevich from Maynard Kisher Stoychevich Immigration and Citizenship Lawyers here in Vancouver at 1168 Hamilton Street right downtown, and also online. Check them out, vancouverlaw.ca, while we take this quick break.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.